Hello, and welcome to the Footy Podcast. To benefit Here's Help. Here's Help is a nonprofit comprehensive rehabilitation and educational agency that's been providing treatment services in South Florida since 1968. For more information on Here's Help or Footy's podcast, you can contact us at 305-685-8201. If you need help or know someone who has a substance abuse or alcohol problem, you can call our admissions office at 305-685-8201, extension 224. If you'd like to make a cash donation to Here's Help and join the fight against drug abuse, call Footy at 305-685-8201, extension 227. Now, here's Footy.
Welcome to the Footy Show. We do a weekly podcast from a variety of issues. We talk about social problems. We talk about sports. We talk about anything that really comes onto our table. I'm Footy, and our guest today is
Amy Ballon.
Amy Ballon, who has written a book we're going to talk about in a second. Of course, Ron Hersey is producing the show. He's doing the recording for the podcast, both audio and video, and we'll post it. Where is that posted? YouTube. And what? How does a person? What do they do? How do they access it?
Here's Help.
Here's Help, podcast, YouTube, and you may remember this, but remember Sky Mercedes? He was like a, Yeah, he was sort of a radiophile for us. He was around all the time. Well, he moved. He's originally from Connecticut, and he moved back there, and he is obsessed with our show. He goes on it every time we post it. It's 52 times. He sends it around, but he's a good friend and spent a lot of years, and we're glad to have him supporting us as well as anyone else who is. So, Amy, oh, what a tangled web we weave.
What a tangled web. Yes.
Yeah, you really bring our audience along. Like, tell them sequentially, like what happened. How did this whole evolution take place in your life? And just the book is called Fabulous to Framed. Wrongfully accused of a felony, this is the true story of a woman who fought for her innocence and the innocence of others. Amy Ballon, that would be you.
That would be me.
And you're nominated for 2018 Department of Justice National Crime Victim Service Award. So this is really a cause for you.
It's a passionate cause for me.
Yeah, that you actually have lived.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
It was quite surreal.
So tell us, take us to the starting line.
So the starting line is I had gotten married a second time, and in 2014 we.
Why the hell did you do that?
I hit my head on something.
I'm joking.
And the marriage was very clearly not going to work. So in 2014 we decided to separate. And the night before he had moved into his new home, he had already moved out. He attacked me.
He had a house standing by?
He had a house on standby, and he had moved out of our condo. He just hadn't moved into his new place. And that night he attacked me. It was the first and only time. So he's a former officer of the law.
He was a cop?
He was a former cop, 6 feet tall, 225 pounds, and I probably don't look that big. So we're very not matched for one another if we were to.
Yeah, right.
So when he let me go, and I found myself...
By let you go, what do you mean?
He chased me into our kitchen and put a knee in my back and put me in a cop hold, basically, where he had...
He did what?
Put me in a cop hold where they have the thumb in the neck and the hand on the head, and I was on a wood floor, and his knee was on my back. And
Why was he doing that?
Because you'd have to talk to him about that. I don't know why.
He just attacked you?
He attacked me. He had spyware on everything I owned. So he had created this narrative, and he attacked me, and
So he was paranoid about you, and
he was paranoid about me and losing me.
was
and
it jealousy or was
it was jealousy.
money? Or
It was
no?
jealousy.
Jealousy.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot going on at the time in his life with his children, and I think the stress of it all he couldn't handle. So my saying I wanted to get a divorce was something that
So you told this police officer slash husband you wanted a divorce.
correct. Correct. Yeah.
And then what happened?
So I ran out of our condo. I went downstairs. I called the police in my pajamas.
He is the
barefoot.
police.
Well, he was the cops.
Yeah.
But when he came down, he asked our concierge if I had called the police. And they said that I had. And so he said, okay, we'll call an ambulance. She stabbed me with a knife.
She what?
Stabbed me with a knife. And on my 911
He said, wait, he said you stabbed him?
Correct. Correct. So on my
So he stabbed himself?
You know, that's a really good question. I think probably. I wasn't there. So I'm going to allege that he did. I took a polygraph to prove.
Wait, so but wait a second, you were downstairs waiting for the ambulance?
I was on the phone with the police, and he came downstairs, and he said, I stabbed him. So they called an ambulance, and on the 911 call, you hear me say, oh my God, he stabbed himself. Somebody has to get the knife. My prints aren't on this knife. I mean, there's no blood on me. I'm in pajamas. He's fully dressed. It was craziness.
Yeah.
And he went outside and met the police and said he was a former cop.
That was the end of you.
And that was the end of me. And I didn't know that. I had no clue I'd end up going to jail. So I ended up going to jail.
So you got arrested that night for stabbing him?
I got arrested that night for stabbing him, correct. Even though my knees were black and blue, I got arrested, yes. And spent 14 hours in jail, and then got charged with a second-degree felony.
Attempted murder.
One under manslaughter. Mike Ducko was my lawyer, and he said, you realize your charge is one under manslaughter, when I said I will not take a plea. And I was facing 15 years in prison. And he said, you know, you're taking a big chance here. This is not a small charge. And I said, well, I didn't do this, and all I have is my truth. So I took a polygraph voluntarily. And what it came down to is...
Why was he doing it? Why would somebody do this? Why not just go get a new girlfriend?
You know, I'm not a therapist, and I'm not a psychologist. I can only tell you that after a lot of research about sociopaths and people that are mentally ill, I suppose, you know, they don't think like us. And you know, when you're a person who has no boundaries, as he clearly had no boundaries, you'll do whatever you have to do to save yourself. He was dating his current wife, who is a former state prosecutor, when he attacked me. So he knew that if he got arrested, that new relationship, again, now it's his wife, would have been over, because he would have had this domestic violence charge.
But I thought he was your husband.
Well, he was my husband. We were getting divorced.
Oh, okay. And she was the new wife?
She was the new girlfriend.
New
I didn't
girlfriend.
know it at the time. I just
there's
knew.
always one of them.
Well, it's amazing to me that a former state prosecutor would marry somebody who did what he did, but not.
Well, but they work in the same building, you know, the courtrooms and all that kind of stuff.
No.
Don't they?
No, she lived in Daytona Beach, and we lived here in Fort Lauderdale. But anyway,
So she was a race car driver. That's a joke. That's a joke.
She could be. I don't know.
Wow. So now. So you're now arrested.
Yes, I was arrested. 14 hours.
Yeah, and you got out, but the charges weren't dropped. They still were pending.
The charges went for 16 months. For 16 months, I had to fight this, and at the time, I had started my own company. And when I was in jail, my LinkedIn database was sent a picture of my mugshot, my entire database. I won't say who did it.
What do you mean your
know.
database?
My friends, my 2,000 friends on LinkedIn were sent my mugshot.
You have 2,000
I have a lot of friends.
friends?
It's business. It's all business.
Really?
Yeah. So when I got out, I didn't even have an opportunity to not I had to face it. I mean, people saw my mugshot and read what the charge was.
Which was?
Second degree felony, assault with a deadly weapon, 15 years in jail.
This is for him stabbing you with the knife.
For me supposedly stabbing him.
You allegedly stabbing him.
I allegedly stabbed him, yeah. So I decided that rather than defend what I was accused of, I feel like the best way I could handle it was to live my life and be successful during the pendency of the trial or what we were going through. And, you know, my story would come out eventually. It wasn't my place to have to defend something that I didn't do. And I chose not to.
You're listening to the Here's Help podcast, the Footy Show. Amy Ballon is our guest. She's telling us this very dramatic story about how she was framed and wrongfully accused of a felony. This is the true story of a woman who fought for her innocence and that of others. So now you're a criminal.
Well, now I'm not. At the time, I was.
Right, but at that point, they painted you into a criminal corner.
They did, which is why I took a polygraph, because I knew all I had was my truth. And
polygraph for about stabbing him.
Correct.
Like that you didn't stab him.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because you know, and he said, she said, you don't have a witness.
Yeah.
And at the end of the case, it ended up that the state of Florida requested a copy of my polygraph, and they concurred that I did not stab my husband.
So the prosecutors went and got a polygraph from you?
From my lawyer, and the state of Florida's polygraphist reviewed it and concurred with my polygraphist that I indeed did not stab
What is it called?
Polygraphist? Polygraph?
Oh, polygraph.
Yeah.
So you beat that rap. You're off, right?
I was off. And the case was actually expunged, which is, you know, really a dramatic thing for them to do when a charge as big as a felony is placed against a person, to get an expunged record. Unfortunately, with the internet, the mugshot is still online, and it's never going to go away. So you can theoretically say, I've never been charged, but somebody can look you up and find a mugshot. So it's kind of counterproductive.
Uh-oh. I didn't know they could do that.
Oh, yeah. And they do. And they do. So.
How far back did they go?
Is there something you'd like to talk about today?
No.
Do you have a record?
Yeah, I do. And it's popped up from time to time.
It does pop up from time to time. So I tried to get that mugshot off, and I was actually introduced to the cyber stalking expert from the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And in an effort to get my life back, so I wanted the mugshot down, he said he would help me.
So this mugshot that was posted of you
Yes.
is ruining your life.
I moved to Sarasota, and I took a job. I had spent thousands of dollars to get the mugshot down. I took a vice president position, and they knew what happened. But I successfully was able to push down the mugshot through different websites, and spent a lot of money on search engine optimization.
So you have gotten rid of it?
I'd theoretically gotten rid of it, and then all of a sudden, right before I moved to take this new job, my former husband was served in his office with civil papers, because I was going to sue him civilly, kind of like OJ.
For what?
For defamation of character, for assault and battery, for what he did, going back to the original crime.
Okay.
And when that happened, my mugshot slowly started coming back on to the internet. And I can only surmise who it was that did that. And when that happened, the job that I had moved to Sarasota for got rescinded. And I knew what it was. I mean, basically, I was going into a market in real estate where they didn't know me. And I didn't have an established reputation like I do here in South Florida. So they rescinded the offer, and that's when I wrote the book. And I sought out help to get the mugshot offline, and was introduced to somebody from the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence who said he would help me. And essentially, he preyed upon me, re-victimized me.
By doing what?
He went into all of my devices to change the narrative of something that happened to create his own narrative.
People can go into
It's scary. They can go
your
into
phone
Yep.
and change the content?
They can change the content of text messages. They can eliminate email messages. This person's a former officer, and he also trained law enforcement. He trained judges.
And
he
who is
trained-
this? Is this the former boyfriend, or is
This is the guy who worked for the Florida Coalition as a cyber stalking expert, and
So he was a stalking.
He was
a stalking expert that was stalking people.
he's a predator. He's a predator. He was a former cop, and we found out through our investigation that he is a predator. When it happened to me, I had a letter sent to the Florida Coalition about it through a lawyer, and they went into his devices, and upon looking in his devices, on the spot, they terminated him. I didn't know why, but I found out later.
Terminated him from
From the Florida Coalition as a cyber
what is the
stalking.
Florida Coalition?
So the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence was
Oh.
the organization that oversaw the 42 domestic violence centers throughout the state of Florida. And they were in statute as the only designated organization, nonprofit, to help domestic violence survivors. All monies, federally and state, were given to the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence. So they were the people to go to if you have domestic violence. Unfortunately,
So they actually generated money.
oh yeah, they're federally funded. They were actually the largest domestic violence organization in the entire United States. They were the only one that were put into statute to receive all monies for domestic violence.
So what does this have to do with you?
Because I went to the Florida Coalition, and the person that I went to get help from to get my mugshot down,
So
cyber
this all
stalked
goes
me.
back to the boyfriend and the mugshot.
Well, it wasn't my boyfriend, but it was a gentleman that I met and the mugshot. And what happened
Well, how would you
was
describe him? As an acquaintance?
he was somebody who was going to help me get my mugshot down. He was really just somebody who said, I'm going to help you get your justice. You were wronged. He read all my depositions. He showed up as the knight in shining armor, there to help me get my life back and to get the mugshot down. And it turned out
So this is all about the mugshot,
this was all about the mugshot. And when a letter got sent to
which you ended up getting arrested, and that's the mugshot
that's the mugshot,
perpetuated through your life.
perpetuated. Yeah.
Did you ever get that expunged? Is that
The case was expunged, but like I said, the mugshot doesn't go away, which is why I sought
yeah,
help.
you can get expunged and you can get all that stuff, but they could still find plenty, you know.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So I waited 4 months for the Florida Coalition to reach out to me, the victim, to say, are you okay? Because I made a claim with my lawyer, and nobody ever reached out to me. So I hired a lawyer and said, you know what, I have no choice but to sue them because they hired a predator. And we placed a lawsuit against them. That was April of 2018. And in response to my lawsuit, they actually victim blamed me and said it was my fault that this man preyed on me. So now
They
I've got
victim blame?
they victim blamed me, and that's
What is victim blaming?
so I'm sure you hear about a lot of women who don't go to the police when
Oh,
they're in
yeah, yeah.
situations because they're afraid they're going to get re-victimized.
Yeah.
So here's an organization that teaches you not to re-victimize, and they did. And that really kind of hit a nerve with me. That was not okay. And as the mother of a daughter, I said, I have a responsibility that this doesn't happen to any
You have
other
a
woman.
daughter.
I have a daughter. And as the mother of a daughter, and any other woman, I had a responsibility to stand up and say, this is not okay. So I was able to get an article written in the Herald about what I'd gone through. And in doing so, the Herald uncovered that there was misappropriations of money with the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence, that the president was making $800,000 a year. An investigation.
How does one get that job, by the way?
I want that job too. Except for now that they're dismantled, I don't think that's going to happen.
$800,000 a year?
$800,000 a year with a budget of $70 million, yes. And so they uncovered that. The Miami Herald.
What is that Florida Coalition?
What is it?
Yeah.
it doesn't exist anymore. But what it was the, like I said, the designated, they were really the ones getting all the funding, and they would decide how much the domestic violence centers would receive for, geographic and demographics in the areas they were in. And they were supposed to have all kinds of trainings and great things with the police and judges and working with prosecutors and so on and so forth.
Meanwhile, they were out on their yacht.
Meanwhile, they're making more money than most people make. And so there was an investigation that kind of coincided with my lawsuit. And the irony of the whole thing was that we uncovered a lot about the person they had hired, the coalition. And
You're listening to, let me just bring us up, people up to date. You're listening to Fabulous 2 Framed, wrongfully accused of felony. This is the true story of a woman who fought for her innocence and the innocence of others, and that is Amy Ballon, who is sitting here telling us her story. This is quite amazing. So I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I think, I could go on and on with the story, but I think that the crux of the story really is that, everybody says you're taking on a big monster. When I went against the coalition and placed a lawsuit, they said your voice is never going to be heard. And I was just very motivated to say, you know what, this needs to change. And as a result...
So you just, Jane Q. Citizen, just decided to go after the Florida Coalition.
Yeah, I did. And when they responded, like I said, in a very poor way, that's when I said, you know what, you can't blame a victim. And that's when the Herald wrote a story, because I had gone to the Herald. And when Ashley Moody and Ron DeSantis got into office, they picked up the story from 2018.
When who got into office?
Ron DeSantis and Ashley Moody. The Herald picked up the story.
Ron DeSantis is now our governor.
Correct. And trust me, I wrote Rick Scott and I wrote Pam Bondi, and I said I was taken advantage of, and nobody responded. So anyway, the state of Florida opened an investigation into the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence. And I ended up going up to Tallahassee testifying twice. There was a bill that legislature had placed against the Florida Coalition to take them out of statute, so they were no longer the only organization allocated funds from the state and federal government. And that was Juan Barquin Fernandez, who actually was the state legislator who brought the bill, it's Bill 1087, to the House of Representatives, and I testified against the coalition, saying they hired a predator, I was preyed upon, but mostly they didn't even care.
So this also, but the criminality of this goes to your boyfriend, or what would you call him?
Well, the criminality, the breaking and hacking into a person's private phone and computer is a criminal act.
Yeah, but wasn't he physically abusive towards you?
No, that was my ex-husband. This was the guy at the Florida Coalition.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the state of Florida ended up investigating, and through their investigation, they found out that the Florida Coalition's top-level executives were getting paid time off days. I think I mentioned one year the CEO was given 465 days of paid time off, and a very perplexed...
what do you mean paid?
Paid time off in days.
They just go like, go ahead.
They basically did. They basically had their own scam going, because that's really what it was. And they were scamming the taxpayers, and they were taking money from victims of domestic violence. So
how do you justify paid days off that exceed the number of days? I mean,
that's so. Chair Tom Leaks, who's the chair of the Public Integrity and Ethics Committee. Actually, I sat in on a 8-hour deposition of the CFO and the COO, the former CFO and COO of the coalition. And that question came up from a lot of the representatives, Rep. Good, Chair Leaks. They said, how could you possibly give 465 days when there's only 365 days in a year? Well, the scam was, if you didn't use it, you could get a check. So these checks, to the tune of about $2 million in one check, were written to the CEO, Tiffany Carr, as well as
Well, he just got $2 million?
she got a check for, yeah, it's if you,
Somebody gave him a
Her.
check for $2 million.
I think that there was quite a few checks that were in the millions. She amassed a small portfolio of real estate, and she's got 4 houses. So this went on, though, because nobody was overseeing this organization, and they were able to do what they wanted.
Well, somebody was it. The people that were getting the checks were overseeing it.
Obviously. And that's why the state did an investigation when they realized what the salary was. And consequently, right before we went into COVID, the state placed a lawsuit against the Florida Coalition against domestic violence. They dismantled them. They put them into receivership. And the story is far from over. But I think the moral of the story really is how important it is that when we have monies being allocated for people like victims or whatever the case may be, that there's accountability, that there is somebody who's looking to see where that $70 million is going.
That strikes. How do they give somebody $400,000 for no reason and they just walk off into the sunset?
Because when you're not audited and you're in statute, so therefore nobody can compete against you, you're given that money. It is in statute. You are given that money and nobody else is getting it. And if somebody doesn't audit them.
Let me ask us a procedural question here. How does one get in that position?
So I believe that she was with the coalition, the Florida Coalition, for about 20 years, possibly. And Lynn Rosenthal, who's a huge advocate, very involved in domestic violence. In fact, she worked, I believe, under Clinton. She was part of the Violence Against Women Act out of Washington. She actually came from Florida. She had trained Tiffany Carr. And when she went to Washington, D.C. to work with, in the White House with the Violence Against Women Act, Tiffany Carr got appointed to the CEO position. So she held that position for many, many years. And she did, I'm sure, a lot of good. But at some point, I guess they lost their way of why they were put in those positions. I don't know.
Okay, so let's move forward now. So what happens after you go through all this?
What happens? I think what's going to happen, and I know it's going to happen.
No, but I mean, did they drop the charges against you or the accusations?
Well, that was done in the first case where I wrote the first book. There was no charge against me. There was a charge against the coalition, a lawsuit placed against the Florida Coalition by me. That case was settled. We saw very quickly that that case was going to get nothing because while we were at the tail end after doing investigation and finding out that the coalition had found graphic images in this employee's computer, and they still don't know if they're victims of domestic violence that he was preying upon. There was a cell phone that was reset back to factory settings. There's a lot of things that happened. And the coalition, when we realized that the coalition was in bigger trouble because now you're talking about taxpayer monies being misappropriated, and we settled right before they went into receivership.
Who's we settled?
My lawyers and I settled my lawsuit.
So you got money?
I got very little. I had a choice. They said I could keep fighting. They had a big insurance policy, obviously, and I had a strong case. I had a very strong case. But
you don't mind me asking, how much money did you get?
I can't tell you that because I signed an NDA, but I will tell you that, I had a pivotal moment where I thought, I've been fighting this for 2 years. I was wrongfully arrested. I had to fight this other lawsuit. And I had a moment and I said, am I doing this? What's the reason I did this to begin with? Why did I decide to go into this lawsuit? And the answer was to help other women and make sure it didn't happen to other women. So I really had to say when I was given the offer, how far do I want this to go? Did I achieve what I wanted to achieve? And I think the fact that that coalition now is no longer in statute and they're no longer existing, I can't say that I could have done much more than that.
So you dethroned their little...
The state did, but it was my lawsuit that ended up having this investigation in 2018 into the coalition.
How come I didn't read about this on the front page of the Herald?
You know, that's a great question. If you Google it right now, Miami Herald, you're going to see it. There was a lot of coverage. It started December, January, and February, and in March, that's when the state of Florida
Did the state ever attempt to recoup the money that these people ran off with?
So that's a really great question. It's not finished. This story is far from finished. We went into COVID, in the end of March. Ashley Moody actually held a press conference to talk about the coalition and why they were dismantling it and what was going on. And you can watch that online. But if you Google it, you'll see a lot of articles by Samantha Gross and Mary Ellen Kloss that were written about the Florida Coalition and what was going on and what happened and all the things they uncovered. So where we're at right now is there is a federal investigation being done, and this story is far from over. When the House gets back and they go back into session, I am very confident that based on a lot of the information we provided in my lawsuit, and also what they've uncovered themselves, that there's going to be criminal charges. There's going to be
criminal charges, meaning what? They stole money, or
they stole money. They stole taxpayer money. I mean, it was fraudulent. It was. I mean, I don't think you're allowed to take money that's given for victims and buy houses, or give paid days off, and that's what we saw happening. So the interesting part, though, about this...
How does one, by the way, get in on this coalition deal?
You'll have to find another nonprofit because they no longer exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the state is actually vetting out different people who are now looking to possibly be the next head of a domestic violence organization.
So there's no domestic violence organization anymore?
There are still 42 centers around the state of Florida.
Oh, okay.
Department of Child and Family Services, who was the pass-through, who got the money from the government, who passed the money through to the Florida Coalition, has now taken the responsibility of overseeing the 42 domestic violence centers until they find the replacement to take the position of the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence. But that's no longer in statute.
Unbelievable stuff. How do you have a life if this is what your life is consumed by this?
No, my life is not consumed. Thank God I have a wonderful career in real estate development, as I had before.
With what?
Real estate development.
Oh.
But I felt very passionate. You know, I have become an advocate for domestic violence survivors. I've spoken out. I've had the good fortune to influence a lot of people. The interesting thing is, when this whole thing happened, I had a lot of people from around the country reach out to me, both domestic violence victims and domestic violence former employees that worked for coalitions, and said, we've got the same thing happening in our state. You know, we need help because the money's not going to victims. And so my hope would be, and part of what, I'd like to see is there being a clearinghouse where there's accountability for these different coalitions that are not helping victims. And
so to sum this up, there's coalitions for victims of domestic violence all over, and how can I say this? The money is not necessarily going to where it's supposed to.
Correct. And I won't say that for every coalition, certainly. And I'm not.
I'm sure there's some good people doing.
There are definitely good people, and I think it's important to highlight that there are some really great ones. Like in New Jersey, the coalition there is spectacular. I just think that there needs to be a little bit more training, a little bit more accountability to make sure that the victims of domestic violence get the help that they deserve, and that the money is being funded for. But I think it's really going to come down to taking the platform of what happened here in Florida and being able to take it to different states and say, how is your coalition being run right now? Who's overseeing where the monies are going? And having somebody be accountable for these poor victims that are not always going to get the help that they need.
You're listening to Amy Ballon. The book is Fabulous Deframed, Wrongfully Accused of a Felony. This is the true story of a woman who fought for her innocence and the innocence of others. Amy, this is an amazing, amazing story, and I'm glad you shared it with us here on our podcast, and we appreciate it and wish you all the luck in the world.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Footy Podcast. To benefit, here's help. For more information about the Footy Podcast or Here's Help, contact us at 305-685-8201. If you need help or know someone who has a substance abuse or alcohol problem, you can call our admissions office at 305-685-8201, extension 224. If you'd like to make a cash donation to Here's Help and join the fight against drug abuse, call Footy at 305-685-8201, extension 227. The executive producer of the Footy Podcast is Sam Zarko, COO of Here's Help.